Hey everyone, it's Mike with 30A. I'm here with Dhiru Thadani. Dhiru is not only an author, an architect, town planner, new urbanist, urban designer, all of these things, and also instrumental in the future vision of Seaside. You've written a couple of books, including The Language of Towns and Cities, and also Visions of Seaside. So tell me, how did you get connected to Seaside in the beginning?
Well, I was teaching back in 1980. I was teaching at Catholic University, and Andres Dhwani came to give a lecture at the university, and we got talking about cities, and I love the cities. I grew up in Bombay. My partner, my teaching partner, and then my professional partner, Peter Hetzel, grew up in New York.
Okay.
And neither one of us really got the suburbs. We just didn't understand the suburbs.
Right.
And so we were always having this discussion about urban design in cities and the stuff that was happening around Washington. And Andres comes to town and he starts talking about small towns and the fact that, and I still actually have my notes. I keep these sketchbooks. This is my iPad.
Right.
And I've got about 100 of these over the years. So I take copious notes, and I have the drawing that I made in 1980.
Really?
From that conversation, or the drawing I made when I got home. And basically, what the story is that, or what we discussed at that meeting, was that in 1950, after World War II, it was easier with the GI Bill for soldiers to buy homes in the suburbs. So what happened was we had the kind of decanting of homes from the city into the suburbs. So that happens in 1950, and the money is only good if you buy a new home. It's not for renovation. So that kind of rules out cities. So it's the first kind of decline of cities by that act. Then the second thing that happens in 1960, you get the shopping mall invented. So now you've got the shopping mall, and that big box kind of goes out. The two anchors connected by a string of inline stores surrounded by parking lots. So that happens in 1960. Then in 1970, you've got the schools changing their regulations for sports fields. So it kind of makes all urban schools obsolete. Because they can't have the required part. So the smallest school has to be 8 acres, 500 students or something, has to be 8 acres. And you don't have that in the city. So now the school has moved out, in 1970. In 1980, for the first time, you get corporations amassing, large corporations happening, and they want the office park. So the office park is invented off the highway, some interchange off the highway, and you get this collection of large office buildings surrounded by parking lots. So now you've got all four ingredients that make up a city: workplace, housing, school, and retail. Right. All moving out to So the idea was, can we take these four ingredients and assemble them together in a meaningful form? Because they're all scattered, they're all pods in the burbs, right? So that's what we were discussing in 1980, 1981, okay? And it was like a fascinating. So Andres comes up with this idea, because he's already in conversation with Robert Davis at the time, that let's go measure some small towns. Let's look at Key West, look at some of these towns all across the South, especially, and see what is the kind of magic numbers. Let's say you got 350 homes, okay? And how big should the school be? How much retail can that support? And how much how much office? And it's really very small amount of office, insurance companies and things like that, right? But can we actually take those four ingredients and put them together, plus recreation? That's like the fifth piece, right? And can we put all those things together in a meaningful form, but use the historic town form as the precedent? Okay, so that's when Andres and Robert take their tour across the South in the land yacht and the big red car, with Daryl and Liz, and they go around looking at these small towns. And at the same time, we're interested in that, so we're looking and measuring towns and trying to figure out those magic numbers, how many square feet of this and that. And we decide to use the plan of Seaside as a design studio project in this design studio that Peter and I were teaching. So and so we have 115 students, and they're working on Seaside, and Leon Crea is doing his review of the Seaside plan. And he's making his drawings, and Andres and Liz are changing the plan of Seaside. For instance, there was no Ruskin Place in the original plan, but Leo is kind of making these corrections and saying we need a whole sequence of spaces between the town center and the church, the chapel. So he's doing that kind of influence, and they're modifying it. And we're saying, look, we want to take this plan and use it as a design project. At the same time, Andres is looking at his husband's code for Paris was a one-page code. And codes generally in America tell you what you cannot do.
Right.
That's the way the code is. All codes are written, right? Enforcement. You can't do this. You can't put this against that. You can't, and so we said, or he said, how about if you write a code that is prescriptive, that says what you must do to make good urbanism? Okay, and that's the big twist. And that's where the Houseman Code, the one-page code, comes from. And then Seaside was the kind of model, if you will, of what was called form-based codes. Now, form-based codes have been around for a long time, but no one used them for centuries.
I see.
So it was a kind of resurrecting of this idea
of the original concept.
Right. Of making a code that says 60% of your building facade has to be on this line. 50% of that facade has to be a porch. It's an encroachment outside the setback line. Parking has to be at the back. Height has to be this. If you have an outbuilding, it has to be located here, at the back or whatever. So about 5 or 6 things that you code. And that became the genesis of new urbanism, was this prescriptive code, looking at precedents, not trying to invent anything, saying, let's look at what has worked in cities before, and all the cities we love. So like, Leon Creer says, we never go to places to vacation which are more than 4 or 5 stories. If you think about it, you never do that, right? You always go to a place where the scale is low. It's a human scale. So why is that experience only reserved for your vacation? Why can't that be your everyday experience? Live in a town where the scale is low, and you have this connection. When you're on the 4th floor of a building, like any of these buildings here at Seaside, you can see the street and you can see what's happening. So you have this direct connection with what's going on the street, on the ground level, and your balcony, for instance. Okay, but when you're in a high-rise building, you lose that connection completely. So you can walk, and you can actually recognize a face down below in that distance. So it makes for a safer environment. And then you've got Jane Jacobs writing her book in the 60s, which we were very inspired by and influenced by. And she was talking about eyes on the street. And the same thing. So all these things kind of like, are
so it was
meshing
wisdom
together.
that was there. It just had to be brought back to the forefront of the way, because urban sprawl happened over 70 years. I mean, and nobody kind of realized this creep was occurring.
Yes, and also no one realized the negative effects. There were many positive things. I mean, all the intentions were very honorable, great intentions. Outdoor space, recreation,
getting away from crime and pollution, perhaps that was in inner cities.
Yes. So those intentions were sound intentions, but the end result has led to crisis of fossil fuel, public health, the smog, obesity. All those things can be now traced back to those decisions. And they're unintended consequences. So, you're not putting blame here to anyone saying they intentionally did this. But America kills 1 in 8,000 people every year in automobile accidents. It's about 37,000 people who are killed as a consequence of an auto-oriented society. Okay, and so when you think of how many people died in Vietnam, 50,000. Just in, 10 years ago, 55,000 people died in automobile accidents, okay? You should be building a memorial for all those people who die every year in automobile accidents, and, you build a memorial for the war, or, but this is a cost we just take for granted. We take this kind of loss of social capital, and it's devastating to society. I know multiple families who've lost a child in an unnecessary.
And even socially, though, all of the time that I think probably back in the 50s when there was a migration to the suburbs, the idea was that you're moving to the country, you're going to spend time with your kids and your dog, but over 70 years, that countryside gets further and further away from the city center, so we actually end up spending 2 hours in a car in a commute, as opposed to 2 hours with our family, which was the original intent.
But the original suburbs outside New York, Connecticut, those places, were transit-oriented. You took the train, and you could see a CEO of a company taking the train from Connecticut into New York. Okay?
Right.
So it wasn't. So they were actually working or reading the newspaper. It wasn't all automobile, and then all that gets kind of phased out, and everything becomes auto-dependent. So, and so in a way, Seaside is the experiment that you can do this. Now, of course, a lot of things have changed in Seaside. It's really more of a, it's not a permanent community in many ways, and it's criticized for that. But what's really fascinating about Seaside is that 1 million people visit Seaside every year. Okay, just if you take the sales of all the restaurants, and we can work backwards and realize how many people are here who've come here. Over the last 35 years, 1 million people have stayed in Seaside. Okay, so they've experienced living here without a car, or minimal use of their car. So for us, even though everyone criticizes, it's just another resort town, it really is a great place to bring people to show. So it becomes our lab in a way to say, look, you can be here, come here, experience this. You can have this every day. You don't have to just have it for 1 week when you're on vacation. You can actually have and live this way, and it's a much more civil way to live.
And that's what we're seeing. I know you've done a lot of work with, say, Macon, Georgia, and in Mississippi, helping communities, especially, what was the community in Mississippi? Long Beach in Mississippi that was devastated after Hurricane Katrina. What type of work are you doing in a place like that to help revitalize an urban plan?
Well, in a place like that, which was devastated, which is, it's a very difficult situation because, one, people just want their homes back, and you come back and you say, look, we can give you something better, but what they really want is just their home back. So you got to move very, very slowly and carefully through that. And what we're trying to say is, look, you've got super long blocks in these cities. So when we're redoing all the houses are gone, let's subdivide it so that we put intermediate pedestrian corridors in. So actually add the sidewalks, add better drainage to the system so it drains towards the Gulf. So there are all those things which are sustainable aspects of of city building, let's say. But then you've also trying to get these folks to start thinking about using their cars less. So actually kind of revising the zoning code so that it permits mixed use, so that you can have a business in your home. So the little things that you do, little interventions that you do, that don't really change the form, still get your town back, but it works better.
Right.
So it's just kind of maneuvering through the codes and trying to make it so if somebody does want to walk, there's a choice available. Currently, in most of these places, there is no choice.
Okay.
So in places like Macon, so I've done a lot of work in university towns, and one of the things that people don't, in the American context, we have a lot of problem with density. Everyone is flipping out. If you say the word density, it's like everyone's kind of, no, we don't want. And two things about that. One is that you need density to get good retail, to get choice. Okay, you can't have a grocery store in walking distance if there isn't density. Okay, that's just the reality. You got to have this kind of catchment area of people who are going to come there. That's one. The other is that what for the longest time in marketing and sales, what marketing folks do is sell the exclusiveness of a place. Okay, so when you use the exclusiveness of a place as your fundamental marketing strategy, what happens is every time a new person moves, you've devalued the property. Okay, because of the first person who moves in or the second person who moves in, now you've got to share the road with 2 people, then 4 people, whatever. So you're devaluing the property because what I'm selling you as a real estate agent or an architect or a planner is that this is an exclusive area. Whereas if you start with the premise of community as what you're going to pitch and sell, every time someone moves in, you're adding value.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's
the opposite.
It's the opposite.
Yeah.
And for too long, we've sold this idea of everything being exclusive,
private and gated, and etc.
And so there's a kind of there's a flip, and there's in that exclusiveness, there's a price to be paid. Parents become chauffeurs to their children because they can't share a share ride, a car ride, etc. And you don't know your neighbors. They're too far apart, so you can't really have. So there's a loss. You might be exclusive, but you're losing something else about what urban life or cities had, and the sense of community. So it's really important to kind of, now I think we're evaluating that, and a lot of people, I would say, currently we have 30% of the market wanting urban community, density, walkability, etc., and only 2% product. So there's this incredible shift. There is a demand. If you look at all the demographics, there's a demand for all the positive things that urban life offers, but there's only 2% places or neighborhoods.
There's a lot of opportunity.
There's a lot of it, and that's why I think a lot of new urbanists are doing so well right now in terms of the workload of what we're and this is a phenomenon that's all over the world. So I've been working in China. I just came back from Russia. Worked in India and Spain and Switzerland. They're all these countries in some way followed the American dream, and are trying to reverse that.
I see.
So there's a lot of opportunity, and these principles are universal. We all get tired if you walk more than 10-15 minutes in the hot sun. So it does, people say, oh, can you take new urbanism culturally and put it somewhere? I said, it's a human body. It's a human factor that we're actually trying to deal with, and that is universal. Maybe an Indian walks 20 minutes more, than an American will, or a European. But in the end, we will still get tired. If you walk up 5 flights of steps,
sure,
you're going to get tired.
So really, it is designing with pedestrians and humans in mind first, as opposed to automobiles, which was the big shift.
Right. And it's human power. It's the idea of saying, let's design as if we have no artificial energy or additional energy to supplement. So let's design something that works on human power first. Then you can add in the air conditioning and whatever you want. Okay, so buildings for centuries. 19 whatever. Cities have been around for 5,000 years, real cities, and it's only the last 100 years that we've avoided walking.
So guys, I'm here with Dhiru Thadani, and we are running out of light. But that said, you're here frequently, and so what I would love to do is invite you back, because I want to talk more about the impact of technology and what we expect that impact to be, whether it's driverless vehicles and what impact that's going to have in new urbanism. And also like to talk about the evolution of urbanism and how there really is a cross-section of new urbanism right here, like if you sliced a tree and could see the rings. And I'd like to talk about how it's evolved over the years. But nature has a way of running us off tonight with a lack of light. But that said, guys, go check out his book. You can find him on Amazon. You can find Visions of Seaside. You can find The Language of Cities and Towns, or Towns and Cities, and absolutely expect us to follow up with a follow-up interview, and also stay tuned to the Seaside Institute, because you have an art exposition and routinely speak here in Seaside. So thank you for everything you do for our community.
Well, thanks.
All right, thank you, Dhiru. All right, bye guys.